So, where's our wedding gift? Or did you come empty-handed? His voice cut through the music, amplified by the microphone, echoing against the crystal chandeliers above. The room, moments earlier alive with laughter and clinking glasses, fell into a hush so sharp I could almost hear my own breath. My son-in-law stood tall, his suit immaculate, smile too bright, too cruel. He was enjoying the spectacle, savoring the silence he had created. Around him, guests shifted uneasily in their seats, eyes darting between him and me, some stifling nervous laughs, others widening their eyes in shock. My daughter's face tightened, but she forced a brittle smile as if hoping the jab would pass unnoticed. I felt every gaze burn against my skin. I stood near the banquet table, my navy gown brushing the floor, pearls cool against my neck. My glass trembled in my hand, not from weakness but from the surge of anger rising inside me. I willed it still, lifting my chin higher. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Inside, my thoughts churned. They wanted to humiliate me, to paint me as old, empty, irrelevant. Let them laugh if they wished. I would not bow. My silence would be my answer, my steadiness my shield. The music had stopped, the hall suspended in waiting, but I remained standing, calm on the outside, a storm within. Did she really not give them anything? The whisper rose from the far side of the table, quickly joined by other hushed voices, each one slicing through the heavy silence. I could feel the ripple moving across the hall, as if I were standing in the center of a pond disturbed by a single stone. Some relatives furrowed their brows, offended on my behalf but too polite to speak out. Others forced small, uneasy laughs, trying to smooth over the tension yet only adding to the sting. My daughter stood at his side, her bouquet pressed against her dress, her face paling for an instant before she arranged it into a fragile smile. That smile cut deeper than the jeer itself. She did not defend me, she did not scold him. She chose silence, and in that silence she stood closer to him than to me. The room seemed to grow hotter, eyes darting, some sympathetic, some curious, most judgmental. My own heart pounded, steady and deliberate, refusing to let the tremor show. I knew what they saw. An old woman cornered, humiliated under chandeliers and whispers. They thought I had been stripped of dignity, left standing exposed before family and strangers alike. I stood very still, holding my glass, breathing through the weight of their stares. They thought I would bow my head. They thought age had dulled me, that the years had worn down my pride until it could be tossed aside with a single cruel remark. I kept my smile soft, small enough to appear harmless, steady enough to hide the storm inside me. My chin lifted, my shoulders squared beneath the weight of their stares. Let them whisper, let them pity or sneer. They knew nothing of the choice I had already made. Tonight I concealed the only gift that truly mattered. The island, 120 million in stone and sand, locked safely beyond their reach. He would never touch it. Not him, not his empty charm, not his hunger that gnawed behind his smile. I let my eyes drift slowly across the room, meeting faces one by one. Some avoided me, ashamed of their silence. Some studied me, waiting for a crack. I gave them none. My gaze was calm, my heartbeat measured, my silence louder than any protest could be. I was not the woman they expected to humiliate. I was not a fragile figure to be swallowed by gossip and malice. I was here, unbroken, reminding myself that dignity is not granted by others. It is held within, and tonight mine remained intact. His grin stretched wider, eyes glinting with the thrill of triumph, as though my silence was proof that he had won. He basked in the moment, shoulders squared, chin tilted high, the picture of a man certain of his own cleverness. I met his stare with a calm so cold it sliced through his smugness. My face gave nothing away, not anger, not hurt, only a steady quiet that unsettled more than fury ever could. For a heartbeat the hall seemed to pulse between us, his pride against my restraint. Then I saw her, my daughter, caught in the middle. Her smile wavered, the mask slipping as her eyes darted between us. Confusion flickered there, doubt creeping in, though she pressed her lips into a thin line to hide it. The space felt heavy, suspended in breathless silence, the guests frozen in their seats, unsure whether to laugh, to speak, or to look away. I held my glass tighter, the red wine trembling, catching the light like liquid fire. The surface rippled but never spilled. That glass was my will made visible, shaken but intact, fragile yet unbroken. My daughter had always been the quiet one. As a child, she hid behind books, shrinking whenever she was compared to brighter, bolder girls. I watched her grow into a woman who carried that same shadow, always measuring herself against others and always coming up short in her own mind. Then she met him. He swept in like a storm of color and sound, an artist with a camera in one hand and an audience in the other. His social media overflowed with pictures of glittering galleries, champagne toasts, admirers calling him the most charming man in the city. He was written about in glossy magazines, photographed beside people she had only ever seen on screens. To her, he was the embodiment of everything she thought she lacked, dazzling proof that she had been chosen. He whispered sweetness, left flowers on her doorstep, planned candlelit dinners that seemed spun from dreams. Every gesture convinced her that she was finally special, finally worthy of being seen. She clung to that feeling, so intoxicating, so new, until it became her truth. Marrying him was not just love in her eyes, it was deliverance. It was stepping out of the long shadow of doubt she had carried since childhood and into a spotlight she never believed could shine on her. To her, he was not only a husband, he was a savior, and love blurred into devotion. Behind the polished suit and the charming laugh, he was something else entirely. He lived for the thrill of risk, for the clatter of chips on casino tables, for the flashing lights of games he swore would pay off the next debt. Each night he gambled, each morning he owed more, always chasing the illusion that one bold strike would wipe his slate clean. When the losses mounted, he turned to crypto, pouring money into schemes that promised fortune and delivered nothing but emptiness. His accounts bled, his debts deepened, yet he kept up the mask of a man in control. I heard whispers of late-night phone calls, of business trips that stretched too long, of text messages that slipped through cracks he could not fully cover. There were women, shadows in his schedule, names that appeared and vanished like smoke. He called them muses, claimed they inspired his art, but I knew better. His devotion was never to my daughter. His devotion was to money, to the lifestyle he craved and could not afford. The marriage was not a vow of love, it was a transaction, a strategy drawn up in desperation. He had calculated it well: marry the quiet girl, win her trust, and through her open the gates to what he truly wanted: my fortune. Every smile at her side, every gesture of affection, was built not on affection, but on hunger. I had spent my life in business, reading contracts and faces with equal care, so it did not take long for the shine to wear thin. His exhibitions were grand affairs, filled with lights, champagne, and chatter, but when I asked about sales, the answers slipped and twisted. The numbers never balanced, yet the spending never slowed. A new car one month, another watch the next, dinners in restaurants where the wine list cost more than most people's rent. I knew the cost of such displays, and I knew his career could not sustain them. He spoke too easily of money, always circling back to the subject with a grin that did not reach his eyes. Once, over dessert, he laughed and said if my daughter ever inherited part of the island, he would know how to make it multiply tenfold. The words lingered with me long after the plates were cleared, his tone casual, almost playful, but sharp enough to slice through my peace. I felt the chill of recognition. He was not courting her heart. He was circling my assets, waiting for the right moment to pounce. To him, my daughter was not a wife but a doorway, a living ATM who could feed his hunger for extravagance. I watched him closely from that day on, smiling when required, silent when necessary, but inside I braced myself. The game he thought he played alone, I had already seen through. I tried to warn her gently, slipping my words between conversations the way one slips a note into a closed hand. Do not let the shine blind you, I told her more than once, hoping she would hear the weight beneath the softness. But she only sighed, her smile tinged with pity, as if I were an old woman unable to understand the new world she was living in. Sometimes she looked at me with something sharper than pity. She thought I was jealous of him, threatened by his presence, unwilling to share her devotion with another. I could see the distance stretching, subtle at first, then widening like a crack in glass. She laughed too quickly at his jokes, defended him too fiercely when his name arose. When I questioned his choices, she snapped that I was stingy, that I never gave him a chance, that I judged him before knowing him. Her loyalty tilted toward him with every quarrel, her arms folding across her chest, her eyes flashing with anger at me instead of him. The warmth between us cooled. Dinners became shorter, words more brittle. I watched her draw closer to him, clinging to his charm as if it were a lifeline, while pulling further from me, the mother who had raised her through storms. In her eyes, I was no longer protector but obstacle. He laughed again, the sound booming through the speakers, his grin daring anyone to challenge him. My daughter stood close to him, her lips pressed into that fragile smile that told me she would not come to my defense. The silence of her choice was louder than his mockery. Around us, the guests shifted uncomfortably, waiting to see if I would break, if I would raise my voice or walk away in shame. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass, my body motionless, my mind whirling. In that moment, the weight of years pressed against me, the memories of battles fought and won, the endless lessons of survival. I felt their eyes burn against me, judging, dismissing, already writing me off as a woman too old to matter. I let the stillness stretch, refusing to give them what they wanted. Inside, my thoughts were sharp and steady. They want to treat me as nothing. Fine. Let them. If they believe I am weak, I will use that belief to lead them exactly where I need them to go. The deeper they sink into arrogance, the more blind they become. And the blind are easy to trap. My lips curved into a faint smile, calm and unreadable. They would think I had swallowed the insult, that I would endure it quietly. Only I knew the truth. Every humiliation they laid before me was a stone in the path that would lead them into their own downfall. After the wedding, only a few days had passed when I walked down the quiet hallway of their house. The laughter of guests and music had long faded into memory, yet the unease from that night still lingered in me. As I passed the guest room, I heard his voice, low but sharp, leaking through the half-closed door. Just have your mother transfer the island and I will handle everything. We will have the capital to invest. The debts will be gone. The words stopped me cold. My hand stilled against the wall, my breath caught in my chest. He spoke of the island as if it were already his prize, as if my years of work and my husband's legacy were nothing more than coins to pay his debts. I pressed myself closer, unwilling to miss a word. Then came my daughter's voice, hesitant, almost broken. I will try to talk to her. My stomach knotted. She was not defending me, not even questioning his demand. She was agreeing. I stood there, heat rising in my face, fury swelling in my chest, but I did not move. I wanted to storm inside, to shout, to drag her away from him, yet I knew the time was not right. Instead, I turned and walked quietly down the hall. Every step deepened my resolve. He thought he was clever. He thought he could trap me, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. The unease inside me grew heavier with each passing day. I could not shake the echo of his words, the way my daughter had agreed so quickly. Quietly, without a word to her, I reached out to an old friend, a man who had once been my partner in business and still kept close ties in finance. I asked him to dig, to look where I could not. Within a week, he called me back with the kind of truth that hardens the spine. My son-in-law was drowning. He owed millions to casinos, his markers stacked high with no way to repay. His cryptocurrency accounts told the same story. Losses piled upon losses, money thrown into pits that swallowed it whole. Worse, there were whispers that some of his creditors had stopped waiting politely. They had threatened him in public, warnings sharp enough to make others turn their heads. I sat alone in my study, the papers spread across my desk, numbers written in red like wounds across the page. My hands were steady as I read, though my chest felt heavy. The picture was clear now, the charming son-in-law reduced to a desperate man chasing debt. I said nothing to him, nothing to my daughter, not yet. I folded the reports, locked them away, and kept my face calm at every dinner, every visit. Silence was my shield. Observation would be my weapon. Do not put too much faith in sweet words. Money cannot be thrown into fire forever. I spoke gently, hoping my daughter would hear the caution beneath my tone, but her face flushed with anger before I had even finished. You always think the worst of him. You would not give us a wedding gift, and now you search for reasons to tear him down. Maybe you never liked him at all. Her voice cracked like glass, sharp and brittle, cutting into the quiet of the room. I felt the distance widen with every word, a gulf stretching between us that I could not close. In her eyes, I was no longer the mother who had carried her through storms, but the obstacle standing in the way of her happiness. The more I tried to guide her, the more she clung to him, as if defending him were the same as defending herself. I saw it clearly, the way she folded her arms, the way her eyes hardened with defiance. To her, standing at his side was proof of her loyalty, proof that she had not chosen wrongly. And so the wound deepened. My warnings became fuel for her resentment, and her devotion to him grew stronger. I sat in silence, tasting the bitterness of helplessness, while she turned away, convinced that protecting him meant protecting her pride. At one dinner not long after the wedding, I sat across from my daughter and her husband, the clinking of cutlery filling the air until her words shattered it. I am embarrassed when people whisper that you gave us nothing for the wedding. Did you ever think about my dignity? Her voice was steady, sharp, aimed directly at me while he lingered beside her with that thin smile, savoring the moment as if he had orchestrated it. The warmth of the food faded, the table heavy with silence, my daughter's accusation hanging between us like smoke. She looked at me not as a child seeking comfort, but as a woman guarding her choice, defending him even when he did not deserve it. I kept my face composed, fingers resting lightly on my glass, refusing to flinch beneath her gaze. Inside, the ache was sharp, but it was steadied by something stronger. I had been here before, in boardrooms where men underestimated me, in markets where competitors thought I was finished. I had learned the power of stillness, the strength of waiting. He thought he had turned her fully against me, and she thought she was protecting her pride. I let them both believe it. My silence was not surrender, but preparation. I drank slowly, my eyes meeting his for the briefest second, letting him see nothing at all, while in my heart I marked the line that had been crossed. That night, after the bitter dinner, sleep would not come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling until the first light crept across the curtains, my mind circling the same truth. I could no longer wait. At dawn, I reached for the phone and called the one man I trusted, the lawyer who had stood by me through every storm. My voice was steady as I gave the instructions. The island, all $120 million of it, was to be moved into an irrevocable trust. No one, not even I, could pull it out once it was sealed. A corporate trustee would hold the title, and a protector chosen from my husband's oldest friends would guard it. I demanded clauses to bar reckless spending, safeguards against challenges. If anyone dared to contest, they would lose everything promised to them. The paperwork was swift, precise, the ink dry before the day was over. When I folded the documents and placed them in my safe, a strange calm washed over me. I imagined their faces when they discovered the door had been closed, the key thrown away. They thought I would stand still, silent and unprotected. They thought my silence was weakness. But as I locked the safe, I whispered to myself, they were wrong. I had just locked away the very prize they coveted most. I knew I could not fight shadows with suspicion alone, so I called Patricia, a woman I had once hired in business disputes, sharp as glass and discreet as night. She listened without interruption, then promised results. Within weeks a package arrived, heavy with the weight of truth. Inside were copies of casino markers, each slip of paper proof of desperate bets placed in smoke-filled rooms, debts stacking into the millions. Another folder traced his cryptocurrency accounts, numbers bleeding red across page after page, losses swallowing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Patricia's team had followed his trail further, capturing photographs of him in the company of women he called muses. The evidence was damning, text messages laced with arrogance. One line stood out, a promise he had typed without shame: "Soon I'll have the island money." I sat in my study, every piece spread neatly before me, my hand steady as I turned the pages. The mask he wore in public had slipped away here, replaced by the man I had suspected all along. My chest ached for my daughter, blinded by devotion, but my mind was cold. I slid the papers into a locked folder, placed it carefully in the drawer where I kept my will. I would wait. The right moment always comes, and when it did, these papers would speak louder than I ever could. It did not take long for my son-in-law to change his tone. The soft words, the careful charm, all of it hardened into something sharper. One afternoon a letter arrived on heavy paper, stamped with the seal of a law firm I knew too well. It spoke of obligations, of promises implied, of a wedding gift that had been expected and now must be fulfilled to preserve family honor. It was written with polite venom, suggesting that failure to comply could bring embarrassment to us all. At the same time, he whispered into my daughter's ear, planting fear like a weed. "If your mother does not keep her word, I may have no choice but to take her to court. We would not want the press to twist this into a scandal, would we?" She repeated his words back to me, her eyes filled with hurt, as if I had betrayed her instead of protecting her. Each warning I gave only pushed her further toward him. Each silence of mine fed her suspicion that I was the one tearing us apart. He knew exactly where to strike, using her pride as his shield, my love as his weapon. I read the letter twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in my drawer beside the other evidence. His threats were nothing new to me. I had faced wolves in finer suits than his. Still, the ache was sharp. It was not the letter that stung, but the sight of my daughter standing firmly at his side, believing he was the one worth defending. I chose not to answer his threats with anger. Instead, I sat at my desk late into the night, the lamp casting long shadows as I drafted a document meant to look like surrender. It was a transfer, neatly worded, complete with signatures and seals, but behind its formality, it was nothing but bait. The account it referenced was hollow, holding a single dollar, a mockery dressed as wealth. More than that, the conditions I inserted were sharp and deliberate. Funds could only be released if the beneficiary carried no hidden debts, no pending lawsuits, no ties to questionable dealings. Every line was a mirror pointed at him, reflecting his own corruption. I wanted to see how quickly he would seize it, how fast greed would push him to expose himself. When I finished, I slipped the papers into a folder and placed it on the corner of my desk, where it would be found when the moment came. To the untrained eye, it was generosity at last, the long-awaited gift finally granted. To me it was a snare, silent and patient. I leaned back in my chair, the quiet of the room wrapping around me. Let him think he had won. Let him rush forward, blind with hunger. The faster he moved, the clearer his true face would show, and when it did, I would be ready. When word reached him that I was preparing to sign the transfer, his joy was impossible to hide. He clutched the folder to his chest as if it were a crown, rushing out to meet the same men who had watched him lose hand after hand in smoky casino rooms. "It's done," he boasted, waving the papers like a trophy. "The island will be mine soon. All debts will be cleared." His friends laughed, clapped his back, already planning how they might share in his supposed windfall. I could imagine the scene, the arrogance spilling from him, the hunger in their eyes. At the very same hour, I sat across from my lawyer in a quiet office, the curtains drawn against the afternoon light. The documents before me were far heavier than his folder of lies. With one firm stroke of the pen, the island passed into the trust, locked beyond his reach forever. My lawyer nodded, sealing the papers with practiced hands. I leaned back, calm and steady, the weight lifting from my chest. Inwardly, my thoughts were clear. He believed he had trapped me, but he had only trapped himself. Let him boast. Let him celebrate a victory that does not exist. He has already stepped into the snare, every word, every careless display binding him tighter. He thinks he has won. But the truth is, he has already lost. He brought it up again, his tone coated in sugar but his eyes sharp. About the wedding gift, perhaps we should finish it soon. I let my lips curve into a small, uncertain smile, tilting my head as if confused. I am old, you know. These papers are complicated. Let me look them over and perhaps I will ask my lawyer to complete everything. My voice was mild, almost hesitant, the picture of a woman too weary to resist. He nodded quickly, satisfied, mistaking my calm for surrender. The faint crease in his forehead smoothed as he leaned back, already imagining the island within his grasp. He did not see the steadiness in my eyes, the patience I had practiced all my life. My answer was no answer at all, only a thread of time stretched thin for me to use. While he gloated, Patricia's reports grew heavier, each page another stone in the wall I was building. Casino debts stacked in neat columns, cryptocurrency losses documented with precision, photographs that left no room for doubt. Every detail fell into place, a puzzle forming the face of the man he truly was. I smiled again, softer this time, and let him believe I was yielding. But inside, I was counting days, waiting for the moment when the picture would be complete and the mask he wore would tear away before her eyes. He grew restless when he realized I was still delaying, so he turned his gaze inward, tightening his grip on my daughter instead. At first it was small, a suggestion wrapped in tenderness. "We should open a joint account," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "It will show we trust each other." She hesitated, but his hand closed over hers, his smile pressing her into agreement. Soon after came the next step, framed as a dream. "If we borrow more, I can expand the gallery. It will make us stronger, wealthier." His words dripped with promise, painting a future she longed to believe in. When doubt flickered in her eyes, he cut it short with a quiet reproach. "If you love me, show me. Money is only a tool." The sting of his words silenced her. I saw her shoulders tense, then soften, the surrender quick and quiet. She signed where he asked, her loyalty binding her more than the ink itself. To her it was proof that she was worthy of him, proof that her marriage was strong. To me it was another chain, each link forged by his manipulation. I watched her cling tighter, mistaking control for devotion, while I felt the chill of helplessness. Yet beneath it, my resolve hardened. Love had blinded her, but it would not blind me. The reports arrived week after week, each one heavier than the last, until the folder in my desk could no longer close. Patricia had done her work well. There were photographs, sharp and unforgiving, of him stepping through the bright doors of casinos, signing slips of paper with a careless hand, debts tallied in ink that could not be denied. There were statements from his crypto accounts, long lists of trades that began with hope and ended in ruin, each line marked with losses that drained hundreds of thousands. And then there were the messages, captured in cold print, words he had typed without shame. "Soon, when I have the island money, you will be my queen." I read those words again and again, the weight of them pressing down on me. My daughter still clung to the illusion of devotion, blind to the hunger that consumed him. But now the proof was in my hands. Every piece was a mirror held up to his face, stripping away the charm, leaving only the greed. I grew quieter with each passing day, not from defeat, but from resolve. My papers were neatly arranged, the reports locked away, every piece of the trap waiting in silence. I no longer argued when his name came up, no longer pressed my daughter with questions. Instead, I listened, watched, and prepared. She mistook my stillness for distance. To her, my silence was proof that I could never accept the man she had chosen. The more I withheld, the more she drifted, her eyes clouded with hurt. One evening the storm broke. Her voice trembled as tears ran down her face. "You never respect my choices. Do you just want me to stay by your side forever?" The words struck deeper than any insult, for they carried not anger alone but years of longing for independence. My chest ached as I looked at her, my own daughter standing across from me as if I were her enemy. I wanted to reach out, to gather her into my arms, but I held back. If I gave in now, she would never see the truth for herself. I knew the pain would cut her when the mask fell, but it was a pain she had to face. Better the wound of truth than the slow poison of lies. Her tears burned in my memory, but so did my determination. I would not lose her to his deceit. He arrived with his lawyer in tow, a folder thick with papers clutched under his arm, his confidence spilling into the room before he even spoke. They laid the documents on my table, the lawyer clearing his throat, rehearsed words dripping with authority. It is a simple transfer, nothing more. Sign here and everything will be resolved honorably. I traced the lines with my eyes, letting silence stretch, my fingers resting lightly on the pen. Then I set it down and gave them a faint, apologetic smile. I am old. I need one more day to review. Tomorrow, perhaps. He leaned back, satisfied, convinced my hesitation was surrender. His lawyer nodded, gathering the pages as though the matter was already decided. They left with brisk steps, his smirk lingering in the air like smoke. Moments later, my phone buzzed. Patricia's message flashed across the screen. You now have every piece of evidence. All that remains is the right moment to reveal it. My hand tightened around the phone, my breath steady. Inwardly, I whispered to myself, let them believe I am weak. Let them grow bold on their own illusions. The higher they climb on pride, the harder the fall will break them. 2 days passed without a word from me, and then he returned, storming into my home with his lawyer at his side. The man wore a sharp suit, his briefcase snapping open with practiced flair, while my son-in-law's eyes gleamed with triumph. They spread the contract across my table, papers neatly aligned, the pen placed before me like a weapon. His voice filled the room, bold and forceful. This is only the completion of a wedding gift, nothing more. If you refuse, we may have no choice but to treat it as a broken promise, an insult to family honor. The lawyer nodded gravely, reinforcing the weight of the words, as though they carried law itself. My daughter sat beside him, her face pale, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. She looked from me to him and back again, torn in silence, trapped in the space between loyalty and blood. Her lips parted once as if to speak, but she closed them quickly, her eyes falling to the table. I sat still, the pen untouched, my gaze resting on the page but my mind elsewhere. The silence stretched long enough for him to mistake it for weakness. He leaned closer, his words sharp, his lawyer nodding beside him as if their combined pressure could bend me. I lifted my hand slightly, my voice calm, almost gentle. If we are speaking of honor, then perhaps we should invite one more person to clarify. The air shifted as the door opened behind them. My old friend, the man I had trusted for decades, stepped inside with measured steps, a thick folder pressed firmly in his grip. His presence alone carried authority, but it was his words that cut through the room like a blade. The island has been placed into an irrevocable trust. By law, not even the former owner may withdraw it. You, sir, have no claim whatsoever. His tone was steady, professional, free of anger yet final in its weight. Silence fell heavy over the table, thick enough to choke. My son-in-law froze, his mouth half open, the color draining from his face as the meaning sank in. The lawyer beside him shifted uncomfortably, his polished confidence faltering, papers shuffled without purpose. My daughter sat still, her hands clenched together, her breath caught between disbelief and dread. For the first time, the mask of triumph slipped from him. In that pause, in that silence, he was exposed. I reached for the folder I had kept locked away, its weight heavier than gold. Without haste, I laid it on the table and slid it across. Perhaps it is time to see the truth, I said softly. He shifted in his seat, but his bravado was already faltering. One by one, the pages revealed themselves. Photographs of him entering casinos, signing debt markers with careless flourish, numbers scrawled across slips that tied him to millions lost. Statements from his cryptocurrency accounts followed, lines of red ink spilling down the pages, every trade ending in ruin. And then the messages, printed in black and white, his arrogance preserved like a stain. Soon, when I get the island, we'll live like royals. The words sat on the page like poison, undeniable. The lawyer at his side grew pale. His mouth opened, but no defense came. He shuffled his papers, eyes down, his silence louder than any argument. My daughter's fingers trembled as she held the sheets, her breath caught as her eyes traced the lines. She froze on the message, lips parting, her face drained of color. For a moment she looked at him, searching for denial, for comfort, but he had none to give. All that stood between us was silence, thick and damning, the truth too sharp to be ignored. Driven into a corner, he slammed his hand on the table, his voice breaking into a roar. "This is all fabricated! This old woman has done nothing but try to destroy our marriage!" His words were jagged, spat with venom, each syllable stripping away the polished charm he had worn like armor. The lawyer beside him shifted uneasily, unwilling to echo the outrage. My daughter's face crumpled as the mask she had clung to for so long finally cracked. Her eyes filled with tears that spilled before she could wipe them away. She turned on him, her voice breaking into a scream that pierced the heavy silence. "How long have you been lying to me?" The words shook through the room, raw with disbelief and pain. He opened his mouth again, but no excuse came, only more anger, more denial. His fists clenched, his composure gone, and for the first time she saw him as I had always seen him, reckless, desperate, dangerous. She sobbed openly now, the sound of betrayal echoing louder than his shouts. I sat still, my heart aching for her, but I let the silence grow around his fury. The truth no longer needed my voice. It was standing there in front of her, screaming its own confession through his rage. The trust protector's voice was calm but unyielding, each word a nail sealing the coffin of his bravado. "You have not only failed in your attempt to seize what is not yours, but you may soon face charges for financial fraud. My advice is simple. Step back before the police come knocking." The room fell silent. For the first time, my son-in-law had no reply. His mouth opened, then closed again, his eyes darting desperately for an escape that was no longer there. The lawyer beside him lowered his gaze, already distancing himself from a sinking ship. My daughter stared at her husband, her face pale, her eyes brimming with tears. The disbelief had vanished, replaced now by a hollow devastation. She looked at him as if seeing a stranger, the foundation of her trust crumbling into dust before her. I kept my hands folded around my glass, my smile calm, steady, but my gaze was firm as stone. "It is time you see the truth," I told her, my voice low but certain. She did not answer, only nodded faintly, her shoulders trembling. In that moment the room seemed smaller, the silence thicker, as if the walls themselves bore witness to the fall of his lies. The weight of the evidence still lingered in the air, pressing down on every corner of the room. He broke the silence with a desperate shout, his voice ragged. He denied everything, twisting words into wild claims, but the harder he fought, the clearer his greed showed through. The polished mask was gone, replaced by sweat on his brow and panic in his eyes. His lawyer, once confident, now sat rigid and pale. Quietly he began gathering his documents, slipping them into his briefcase without a word, as though to distance himself from the collapse unfolding before him. My son-in-law turned then to my daughter, his voice cracking under the strain. "Believe me, this is all a story your mother invented to tear us apart." His plea fell flat, brittle and hollow. My daughter held the stack of papers in trembling hands, her tears falling onto the ink as though to blur what she could no longer deny. Her eyes lingered on the printed message, the words that cut deeper than any blade. "Soon, when I get the island, we'll live like royals." Her lips parted, her breath shuddering, and the truth spilled out in a broken whisper. "You never loved me. It was only for my mother's money." The room seemed to close in around her, the voices of the family fading to a distant murmur. She pressed her fist to her mouth, choking on sobs, as if trying to hold back years of blind devotion collapsing all at once. Every memory she had clung to, every tender word she believed in, now revealed itself as hollow, nothing but a mask worn by the man before her. She looked at him then, really looked, and the charm she once adored was gone. What stood in front of her was not a husband, not a partner, but a stranger with greedy eyes and empty promises. Her heart broke with the weight of it, but in the breaking came clarity. The love she had fought for, defended against her own blood, was nothing more than an illusion spun to bind her. The illusion shattered, and she stood trembling in the ruin, awake at last. The shrill buzz of his phone shattered the silence, and before he could silence it, the speaker carried the voice into the room for all to hear. "If you don't pay us back, don't blame us for what happens next." The words were raw, threatening, impossible to mistake. A heavy stillness followed, thicker than before. My daughter's eyes widened, the last fragments of her hope crumbling as she stared at the man she thought she knew. I did not move, my gaze steady, cold, refusing to grant him pity. His hands shook as he fumbled with the phone, then dropped it onto the table as though it burned him. The color drained from his face, and he sank into the chair, head buried in his palms. For the first time there were no excuses, no laughter, no lies to shield him. Silence claimed him, broken only by the sound of his ragged breathing. The arrogance, the sneers, the talk of islands and fortunes had vanished. What sat before us was no longer a man who dreamed of conquest, but a hollow figure crushed beneath the weight of his own ruin. The island was beyond him, forever out of reach. He had gambled everything on greed and lost. My daughter turned to me at last, her shoulders shaking, her face wet with tears. Her voice broke into sobs as she clutched the papers to her chest. "I was wrong, Mother. I did not believe you." The words pierced me, not with anger but with sorrow, for they carried all the weight of her regret. I rose slowly and wrapped my arms around her, holding her as I had when she was a child frightened by storms. My voice was steady, firm, yet softened with love. "It is not your fault. Your mistake was only trusting the wrong man, but waking up in time is never too late." She pressed her face into my shoulder, her sobs muffled, her body trembling against mine. Around us the room was still, witnesses to a bond that could bend but not break. I felt her hands clutch tighter, as though she feared I might let go, and I knew then that the distance that had grown between us was beginning to close. The years of wisdom, the scars of my battles, were not just mine to bear. They were a shield I could now place around her. In that moment, beneath the weight of betrayal, we found a fragile peace. She had been lost in illusion, but she had returned, and I, though wounded, welcomed her back with open arms. He shoved his chair back and rose unsteadily, rage twisting his face. Forcing out one last threat, he growled, "You will regret standing against me." The words fell flat, brittle and empty. My daughter sat frozen, her eyes red, yet there was no trace of the loyalty she once gave him. No allies remained, no defense to be found. He stumbled toward the door, pulling it open with more force than needed, as if sound alone could restore his dignity. It did not. The weight of silence followed him as he stepped into the fading light. His shoulders sagged, his pace slow, each movement stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. He left without looking back, alone, his figure receding until he was nothing more than a shadow at the edge of the path. Once he imagined himself triumphant, yet he walked away defeated, carrying nothing but disgrace. A few days later I stood on the balcony of my villa, the sea wind brushing against my face. In the distance, the island shimmered in the glow of sunset, its cliffs kissed by light like a crown of fire. I lifted my glass of red wine, inhaled slowly, and let out a long breath. My face was calm, my heart steady. They wanted to turn me into a joke, to humiliate me in front of those I love. Yet my silence became the snare, my patience the net. Age is not weakness. Age is the knowing of when to endure and when to strike. I sipped the wine and let the truth settle in my bones. When my daughter came to see me, her eyes were still red, but her steps were firm. She took my hand, her voice soft but resolute. "I have canceled the joint account. I ended all financial ties with him. I also found a therapist. I want to stand on my own without depending on anyone." My heart ached at her pain, yet swelled with pride. The cruel truth had scarred her, but it also forged her strength. For the first time in years, I saw not a child but a woman ready to carry her own life. Later that day, my old friend, the lawyer who had guarded our trust, stopped by. He placed the sealed folder on the table and confirmed, "The island is secure, beyond reach. If he dares to challenge, the no contest clause strips him of everything." I smiled faintly, nodding once. Justice does not always need to shout. It arrives quietly, but it arrives all the same. That evening, my daughter and I sat together on the balcony, the horizon endless before us. The waves shimmered silver, the air smelled of salt and promise. My thoughts turned inward, and I spoke softly to myself. They believed money could buy all things, even honor and blood. But the truth is different. Justice lives in the hearts of those who refuse to bend. I kept the island not for wealth, but as proof that my dignity could never be stolen. If this story touches you, remember, silence is not weakness. It can be the sharpest weapon. Share this with someone who has been dismissed, someone who needs to know that dignity can always be defended, at any age, in any season of life.